Discussion for extraction part 2. The separation of acidic, basic, and neutral compound. We are given a mixture of organic compound about 100 mg to start with. In this mixture, there is possible base, possible acid, and possible neutral compound. These compounds are insoluble in water, but they are soluble in ether. So we use the ether to dissolve them, since the ether is an organic solvent. Before we start discuss about our result, we would like to talk about what we did in this experiment first. First, we start to extract base by using an ionic acid HCl. And then we extracted acid by using ionic base sodium hydroxide. And lastly, we evaporate the ether to get the neutral compound. We determine the identity of our unknown compound by their melting point. As a result, we have no base, but we have tranexamic acid and fluorine in our unknown mixture. Base extraction. Before adding HCl, we have only one layer with all our unknown mixture that was dissolved in the ether. Then when we add HCl in, there was two layers here. The top layer is ether and the bottom layer is the aqueous. Because ether has density of 0.8 compared to water, so it floats on the top of the aqueous. These are the equations if there was base present in our unknown mixture. Base will react with the hydrochloric acid to produce BH plus and Cl minus as the ions which are dissolved in the aqueous. So then we can separate the aqueous from the ether layer. After separating the aqueous layer, we would like the organic base in form of solid. So we need to add some sodium hydroxide to react with the conjugate acids of the organic base to form the precipitate and some water. Then we can use the microfilter to separate out the precipitate from the aqueous layer. Because in our unknown mixture, we didn't have any base, so after we separate the aqueous layer from the ether layer, in our aqueous we have only hydrogen ion, chloride ion, and water. So when we add sodium hydroxide in to make the solution become basics, the solution stayed clear and there was no precipitate form. In those aqueous layer, there was hydroxide ion, sodium ion, chloride ions, and water. Acid extraction. We added sodium hydroxide in the ether layer, and then there was two layer formed again. We had to separate out the aqueous layer. The tranexamic acids react with the hydroxide ion and they become the conjugate base with water. So in the aqueous here, there was conjugate base from the cinnamic acids, sodium ion, and water. Then when we add HCl in the aqueous layer, there was precipitate formed in those aqueous. Here is another equation. The conjugate base will react with the HCl to form the tranexamic acid and also some chloride ion. In aqueous layer here, there was precipitate of the cinnamic acid, sodium ion, chloride ion, and also water. So we saw the precipitate, so we used the microfilter to filter out the cinnamic acid, and here they are. Neutral compound extraction. In the ether layer, we already extracted the base and the acid. So what we all have right now is just the neutral compound. So we can wash it off with some DI water and then just evaporate the ether. Then we will get just the drying neutral compound. We use drying agent sodium sulfate to absorb the water from the ether. This is our small filter. We need to use this filter because we don't want any sodium sulfate mixed with our neutral compound. We transfer the ether into a smaller flakes and heat it on the hot plate to evaporate all the ether, and then what we left off with is only the neutral compound. Ether is very flammable, so we need to be very careful in this step. In our unknown mixture, we have only tranexamic acid and fluorine present. But how can I know what compound is what? With just this white powder, I have to use the melting point apparatus to figure it out. Here is the apparatus for measuring the melting point of the compound. We started off with the unknown mixture of 100 mg, but we have the percent recovery is only 18.3%. It means that there is some error in this experiment and also some mistake that we made in this experiment. There was a lot of transfer of liquid in this experiment, so as we transfer from one glassware to another, we might let off some organic compound in there. This might be a reason that we don't have a full percent of recovery. We also made some mistakes such as spill some of the precipitate of acid in the fume hood, and also when we filter out the precipitate of the acid, we use the regular filter instead of the microfilter, in which case we might lose some of the organic acid in that filter paper. In conclusion, we separated the organic compound based on their basic, acidic, and neutral nature. After these experiments, we also have learned how to deal with the small amount of compound and need to be more careful in handle them. Thank you. Here is the end of the discussion.